to Thriving Together, Stories from CCEJ, a podcast from the California Conference for Equality and Justice. Our mission is to educate and empower youth and adults to lead change for equity and justice in our communities. I'm Daniel Solis, your host. Today, CCEJ staff Monica Lopez and volunteer Katy Tinsley revisit the workshop they presented at the 2025 Roots of Justice convening, where they dive into a topic that touches every part of our lives, whether we're at work, with family, in community spaces, or even just chatting with friends. We're talking about dialogue. Not debate, not discussion, dialogue. In this episode, we're breaking down what dialogue really is and why it matters in our everyday lives. Because while you might think of dialogue as something that only happens in a formal circle or workshop, it's actually happening all the time. It's the quiet check-in with a colleague, the way we ask our partner how their day really was, or the pause we take before responding in a heated moment. Think of this as a conversation starter, a way for all of us to deepen how we show up for one another. Let's listen.
Hi, I'm Katy, and my pronouns are she, they. I began my relationship with CCEJ in the late 90s as adult staff at the wonderful Building Bridges Camp. My child is currently a youth leader with Building Bridges Camp, so I just have so much gratitude for how much we've grown through our dialogue and connection with CCEJ. More recently, I began supporting with facilitation with CCEJ and had the great pleasure to co-facilitate with Monica.
Hello, I am Monica, pronouns she, ella. I am a trainer and coach with CCEJ and have been with CCEJ about 2 years now. Katy and I facilitated together at ROJ a session on building differences, dialogue skills for everyday life. And from the feedback we received, we wanted to bring the conversation to a larger audience. This is why we'll be talking about how everyday dialogue matters. Skills for everyday life are really, I think, habits and skills from our everyday that really support us in our, even in my conversations and my inner dialogue, but also I think that also reflects dialogue with those around me, the relationships, folks that I talk to every day. And so I really see dialogue as an opportunity to see each other more. And it shows up at work, with friends, in our communities. And communication is just such a big part of how we show up in the world. And it really comes from a place of everybody has a need to be seen and heard and understood, and dialogue allows us to do that. And there are parts of it that we are learning, and there are parts of it that we are unlearning to be in those relationships. And so dialogue can be a little bit messy, but I think it is also part of building culture, building community, and like small conversations every day can also make a really big impact.
I totally agree with the idea of the big impact of small conversations, or what we might think of as a small little interaction, and the way that those interactions can just ripple, right? So when I'm thinking about conversations and thinking about even how I've been able to transform with CCEJ, I think about like how I'm listening, because how I'm listening really impacts the way that I receive others' stories and I receive the knowledge and wisdom that they're sharing. And I also know that for me, how others listen to me really matters on how much I'm going to share. When I think about that, I think about listening as a practice. So one of the everyday dialogue skills that I think about often is really, how am I listening? What is my body language like when I'm listening? What's my mind doing while I'm listening? I think of it as a practice similar to a mindfulness practice, where I'm checking in with myself. You know, am I present? How grounded am I? Before asking someone to speak or engaging in a dialogue, I want to check in with myself. Am I ready to listen? Am I going to listen to them in a way that is going to honor their dignity, is going to honor their story? And I'm listening to understand, and that's where the impact comes for me, is when I listen to understand it helps me shape my own lens and my own ways of being in the world. Although I know like the reason it's part of a practice is because sometimes when I'm listening, I'm thinking about, oh, I have these ideas about how that relates to my life. And I have these ideas about how that person maybe could get some support if they did this thing or that thing, right? As opposed to just, I'm just here to listen. And it's such a gift to self. So thinking about what you shared, Monica, about like my own self and others, it's such a gift to myself to not try to be in that mode of listening where I have some kind of agenda about what I'm going to say, but to just deeply listen. And how when people have given that to me, when I can tell they're just deeply listening, what a gift and offering that has been for me. So even before I ask a question, I try to check in with my listening stance. How am I?
I think that relates also to one of the topics we touched upon at this session at Roots of Justice, which was open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions. And wanting to be able to be there and listen also means being welcoming to all the other parts of it that maybe we don't know or see yet. And that's what an open-ended question can do for us. I'm not actually looking for something specifically. I'm putting this curiosity on the table. And that open-ended question is just the way in which we can put that into words and communicate that. And I know I myself have, if I'm feeling in a place where I'm frustrated, my close-ended question might be that I already have an assumption that I already made, and I'm just trying to confirm that and be like, yeah, I know I'm right. I think what you're sharing around where is my listening stance. If I am feeling like there is something that I already made up my mind for, I might not be in a listening stance. And then being able to recalibrate and say, actually, I do want to approach this with some curiosity, and how can I express that with my words? And that might be an open-ended question, which, that might be the difference between the open-ended and the closed-ended, is where does it really coming from? And for example, instead of asking just why did you do that, asking an open-ended question of, can you tell me what was going on for you? Then I'm able to make more space, not only for myself to understand more, but also more space for that relationship to have more of a playground to be able to work with in that moment. So these questions were a really big topic as well at this Roots of Justice session, because coming to a genuine place of curiosity when we're having really difficult conversations can be hard to get to, especially in the political climate that we're living in right now.
Yeah.
And so really it takes, maybe we are in a place where these open-ended questions can do a lot more for us now and can be a little bit harder to get to in these moments.
I love the analogy of a playground, because I think about playing, and I think often when we think about conversations that are around topics where we might be coming from very different directions and very different lived experiences that are informing our thoughts and beliefs around topics, and our experiences can be so varied and so similar, right? So thinking about on the playground, like how I'm going to try on, maybe I'll try the bars, but I don't really know that much about them, right? So as we're building a culture, intentionally building a culture of restorative dialogue, of deep listening, of asking open-ended questions with curiosity, thinking about like trying on the different parts while intentionally bringing some guardrails into the conversation, right? I know that in our session that we talked about that, right? That was one of the things we talked about with the description of like a roller coaster and how does it stay. So I love the idea of bringing the playfulness in it with some of the safety involved, right? So like I also appreciate the concept of a brave conversation. This idea that a conversation is going to be safe, or that we always have to feel a certain way. I didn't always feel safe when I was learning how to use the bars when I was in school, right? When I was on the playground. And there was something very freeing about leaning into it with caution and care for the well-being of everyone involved. So I think about, this intentional way of building a culture, the same way maybe we build a playground, right? And then like, how are we using the different tools that we have in order to create a culture of listening, create a culture of care. How does my response to someone else sharing help to build that culture, or how does my response dig into that culture and tear it down? So what is me as an individual human being in these relationships? How am I creating that consciously, that culture? How am I serving into that, or how am I limiting it? I think part of the everyday culture also is knowing that we're going to have disagreements and conflict, and thinking about how do we, like you talked about, creating space, right? Holding space. How do we hold space for one another as we work through that?
And dialogue, I think, can look different also when we are in a place of conflict, but the values of like care and curiosity and wanting to get to a place that builds something is the heart of like how we can use conflict to continue to build that culture. And the dialogue can look also different because we're also coming from different experiences in different ways, and yet the practice of being able to show care in my words is still there. And so I think that's why it can get a little bit muddy when it comes to dialogue and conflict. And it is also something that we learn along the way. But thankfully we do have our restorative justice practices and our restorative justice ways of seeing it to guide us even when we're not super sure of how to show up in this very specific conflict that requires a different part of me to be able to show up in that dialogue. And so yet the dialogue is the avenue in which we are able to show up, and the relationship is might be what we are hoping for or where it's coming from to be able to move forward. And so really dialogue connects a lot of these different moving pieces that can happen in a conflict, and even much more when it is maybe an entire community in conflict. Maybe it is a whole country in disagreeing in conflict. And so I also see how dialogue scales from a one-on-one to a large community, trying to see each other.
Yeah, I think about times when I've had conflict or disagreement, and the way that I entered into it with the other person really was able to deepen our relationship, on the other side of it. Like we understood each other's boundaries better. And that is when we were both, as you mentioned, invested in the relationship. And so thinking of the restorative justice belief that a conflict, or when there is hurt or harm, that it's not so much being punished, it's more like, now what do I do to make things right? So that obligation to the relationship more so than, and the obligation to community, and how dialogue plays such an essential role in relationship, and how do we find the needs and obligations that arise through open-ended questions and through honest dialogue and through listening with intention and open hearts,
And I would also encourage folks listening to this to think about what is their stance of listening, as Katy shared, in different moments in their life, in different parts of their life, different relationship, different settings and workspaces or family space or friend spaces. And what is it that allows you to form a deeper question, an open-ended question? What supports you to be able to both being able in a place to listen and to also ask from a place of curiosity? And best case scenario, even if we're not in a conflict, that just means we get to know life even more and we get to savor life even more. And in the place of a conflict, that hopefully allows us to move forward and make any repairs that we might need to. But in the end, it's all to be able to live like an honest and like dignified life that feels good to you, that feels fulfilled, that you feel fulfillment in that and in yourself.
I think for me, the idea of being fulfilled in my relationships, sometimes fear will stop me. And I feel like restorative dialogue gives me the tools to where, like, I can check in with myself. How's my listening stance? Am I being curious? Where am I coming from? So that then where in, maybe 10 years ago, I wouldn't have named something or asked a question about something that I noticed might be coming up in community because of my fear. I feel like the skills that I've learned through restorative dialogue really allow me to have less fear to say things, to ask questions before things grow too big, right? Because my assumptions often will make things grow into something. Our assumptions about one another will make a simple disagreement or a simple boundary need turn into a conflict, when if I could be brave at the beginning. So I definitely think about that with listeners too, like having the skills and the bravery to have those courageous conversations, to bridge, because I know right now in our climate, that's one of the hardships is, the polarization and how there's the divide and we're not talking across the divide, which just makes it grow. So I think, how do these skills, for me, these skills have been just vital to my ability to have those bridging conversations and make connections.
This reminds me of how we use some of our communication guidelines of speaking from the heart and our restorative dialogue and just dialogue, open-ended curiosity, all the things we are naming, I think allow folks to be able to speak from the heart as well. And being able to tap into that, like being able to reach into what feels sometimes even for me like really far away, and I have this maybe a reaction or a way or a habit or something that I might have learned of how to communicate, but then that practice of that curiosity and that dialogue allows me to actually navigate through that and reach all the way in there to be able to speak from my heart. I also see that as the other side of being brave, of being able to be true to myself and being able to share, and it actually being something that could support in the moment while I'm still genuinely speaking from what I really am feeling. So I feel like it is also a way of like honoring yourself to be able to honor your relations.
One of the things I think about when we're learning is honoring our path and where we are on the path. And knowing that some days, even as someone who is immersed in practice and works on maintaining these practices daily, I am sometimes in different places in my learning journey too, and I make mistakes. And I need to reflect and honor the parts of us that are growing. And it makes me think about the roller coaster check-in that we had at the session and how people could choose. So there was a roller coaster drawn on a board, and then people had sticky notes where you could name where you are on your practice. And it was very open-ended, and so we got some really great responses. And so, some people were at the top of the hill and just ready to hold on, for going down the slope, or some people feeling like, they were at the end of the ride, but they were going to go and get back on again, so just some different ways that people, so just kind of thinking about where we are as practitioners, and we want to share with our listeners some tips, because part of that roller coaster metaphor was the guardrails. So we want to share with you some of the wisdom that we shared during that session with some tips.
Some of the beautiful wisdom that came in from that check-in was how, exactly as Katy mentioned, our journey isn't just linear. So being able to be patient with yourself so that you may continue to practice, and that this is a work of practicing, of getting to know yourself more, allowing it to be a little bit more authentic for yourself. That has been a tip and a life hack for myself, and I've also heard other folks mention the patience to oneself, and just continuing to know that this is a journey where you are always learning as well. So the learning and the practice come hand in hand with the patience.
When I think about patience, it makes me think about noticing and even allowing quiet and reflection. So part of my practice with myself and being gentle with myself is just allowing some quiet, right? And embracing, that's one of the pieces of wisdom that I've gained just over the years is allowing a little bit of time for some quiet self-check-in, for some breathing before I speak or as I'm listening. What are the ways that I can be more gentle and I can show up in a reflective way? Which one share that I'm thinking about with listening is being mindful, as we've mentioned a few times. Another thing is to rephrase. So, Monica, I heard you talk about honoring yourself and honoring others through this practice of restorative dialogue. And then another practice that I know with restorative dialogue is if someone's talking about something hard, we talk about normalizing that. So sometimes when I've shared, and I have a mentor who's really good at doing this for me, she's kind of like, of course you felt ba-da-da. And we have a close enough relationship that she can say, of course, Katy, we know you and we know life. And that's very, it's okay and great for you to be feeling however you're feeling. So this idea that like the person that is sharing with me isn't sharing anything that's, well, it might be different from my experience. It is their experience and it is to be honored, going back to the honoring.
That brings up for me another tip of setting intentions for yourself. Setting intentions of what is the kind of person I want to be remembered as. And when I'm in this conversation, what do I want to leave? How do I want to feel at the end of this conversation? Granted, we cannot always have control, right, or a guaranteed outcome. And yet I am still centered in myself. I set my intention with myself and I can still come back to myself. And that just allows me to show up better in that dialogue, coming back to being authentic to myself. And that will allow me to have more authentic questions and just engage more authentically and even maybe respond more authentically and being able to be directly compassionate. Being able to be kindly compassionate and very direct of what it is that I might be needing, but that is my authentic self and what I'm feeling, and that might still be aligned with my intention. So tip, set intentions for yourself.
And authenticity, yeah. Is there like a go-to question that you might have that invites people into open dialogue? So some of my growing up in the 80s, and so my go-to is, what's up? And so I'll ask people, what's up? And it might be the tone around it that might communicate a little bit too. So I think that's another piece of wisdom that I've gained in this work is like my tone, how I ask a question, what my body language is like will also drive like how that question is received by somebody else. So when I think about my what's up, it might be like, oh, this is the first time I've seen you. What's up? Or it might be, I see something in your body language that shows me that you might need some care. So my what's up might be, what's up? A little bit different. So even though it's the same question, how I'm asking it, and then that question allows me to be more authentic with my 80s self and ask in ways that are open, Yeah. Yeah.
That I love that tip of just being present even with your body language. Because there is also so much that is communicated non-verbally. I would highlight that as well as a tip, being present with our body language, with when somebody shares a story and is like maybe in the really nitty-gritty of the story, we're really intrigued and they can see that and they can feel like we are really there with them. And then maybe they get into a little bit of the funnier part of the story and we laugh with them and we just hold space in our own kind of funny way as well. So our body can also communicate in so many different ways, and again, for that authentically to come through, but in our own body language. I am a person that like leans in or is like, or has little reactions of like, oh no, are you serious? That happened? And will use my hands as I'm also listening. And that, I think that is also another way to show presence. And of course, you also know who you are with and the relationship that you have and what feels right in that moment as well.
Yeah, when I think about noticing, I also think about noticing the other person's body language and noticing if there's a shift. Sometimes I feel like it's described as a shift in the energy in the room, which how do we read that? Is it through body language? What's going on? Is it through tone of someone's voice? And then being able to name, this is something that's a newer skill for me, is naming is something that I've appreciated for a little while. Like I noticed this shift. And then the question that I'm working on bringing into my own practice more is what's coming up for you, and as a way to recognize that I see you, right? So you mentioned earlier, we all want to be seen, heard, and understood. And I know for me, when people ask me something like that, what's coming up for you, or I just noticed a shift in your body language, or you're like, I feel very validated and seen when people notice the little things. And so it's something that I try to offer to others, and now trying to offer that idea of what's coming up for you instead of making an assumption or, you look uncomfortable, something like that, which like maybe I'm not uncomfortable. Maybe like this is just my resting face or, so just how can asking and being authentic in that ask and being able to be more present when I'm more in my body and being my more authentic self, I think too.
Closing tip for when we are listening to other folks is to active listen and not zone out or be on our phones as somebody else is telling you a story, whether it may be a story in passing or that is a deeper story, but just having some presence, y'all. Do you have any closing tips, Katy?
You know what? I'm going to go back to one of the original wisdoms I learned from being in space in CCEJ, which is to listen from my heart and speak from my heart. So when I am grounded in those community agreements, I feel like I am living into my highest self and I'm able to, like you said, thinking about what do I want this person to know about me after this conversation, even if the conversation wasn't about me. So if I speak and listen from my heart, I feel like I can really live into the highest self that I want to be.
Thank you so much, Katy, for this conversation, for us to be able to continue this conversation after our Roots of Justice convening.
Thank you, Monica. Always a pleasure to be in dialogue with you.
Thank you to Monica and Katy for sharing their knowledge and experience in using dialogue skills in everyday life. If you're listening and something from today's episode resonated with you, we invite you to carry it forward by leaning into curiosity. And if you want to deepen your practice, check out CCEJ's trainings and resources. We're here to support you in building more just and connected communities. And be sure to save the date for our upcoming Roots of Justice convening on Friday, February 27th, 2026. We hope to see you there. CCJ's podcast is sponsored in part by LA vs. Hate, a coalition of partners led by the LA County Human Relations Commission who are committed to preventing and ending hate in our communities. Once again, I'm Daniel Solis, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to hear more stories of thriving together.